Now we're resuming what we've been learning. We actually began yesterday, and that is the connection between Yud Shvat, which is the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away in 1950, and 1 year later, the same date that our Rebbe filled his empty chair, took over the leadership of Chabad. And this coming Shabbat, which is called Shabbat Shira, we read the song about the song the Jewish people sang when they crossed the Yam Suf. And also we read about the splitting of the Yam Suf. And this is the preparation mincha of this coming Shabbat. We read about the giving of the Torah. We begin to read Parshat Yitro with giving the Torah. Okay. Right. We say that Yitro, that's next week's Torah portion, that he was like the king of idolatry. He knew all the idolatry in the whole world. All the idolatries that were in the whole world, he knew all of them. And he heard about the splitting of the sea and the war with Amalek. That's going to be the end of this week's Torah portion. And when he heard about that, he said, that's it. I'm going to convert. I want to be close to Moses. I'm interested in just serving the creator of the universe, the God of Israel. That's what I want, Moses. And after that, after Yitro came, then God gave the Torah. God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Okay, so we see that they're all connected, even in a timeline, they're connected. Okay, so let's go back to this. What happened? Jewish people are slaves 210 years in Egypt. Moses comes along, 10 plagues, they get out. That's where this week's Torah portion starts. They get out. The Jewish people get into the desert. And the Egyptians are running after them. And they come up to the sea, and the sea splits and they go across. Okay, but before that, it says something interesting, that really to go, if you look at a map, you'll see that to go from Egypt to Israel, you don't have to cross any rivers. There's no rivers over there. God purposely took them in this convoluted way so that they wouldn't go back to Egypt again. Because the Jewish people, they didn't really want to leave Egypt. I mean, they did leave. They left. They didn't leave. There were 4/5 of the Jews that they just stayed. They just stayed. And this 1/5 of the Jews that went out, they were willing to leave, but they still were, very shaky about it. And you can't blame them because they had been slaves and their parents were slaves and their grandparents were slaves. And like I said before, they have their comfort zone. And not only that, Egypt had been decimated. God destroyed all of Egypt and they destroyed the army. And now what do they have in the place of that? They're out in the middle of the desert and it's scary. On the middle of the desert. And it's true they were surrounded by clouds of protection and they had what to eat. They had manna and things like that. But still, you never knew what was going to happen tomorrow. You never knew what was going to, they didn't have any bank account. They didn't have any house to live in. They were always moving around in the desert. So they wanted to go back. So God knew what was going on, especially when they were fresh out of Egypt. They knew that as soon as they saw any trouble, they would run back to Egypt again. So God took them in this devious way. So it would be very hard for them to figure out, where did I go back? Was that sand dune over there? Was that on our right, on our left? Is that the same one we saw before? There was no land markers. There was no nothing. And so the Jewish, so in order, because God chose this new way for them, this really twisted way, so that brought them to the sea. That's what brought them to the sea. Okay. So it says, Lo nacham Hashem, that God did not allow them to go in a straight way. It says in the Midrash, Mitzrayim, to the land of Israel, was 11 journeys. 11 journeys. They made 11 stops. Ella Shenisam HaKodesh Baruch Hu, but God took them Derech HaMidbar for 40 years. Like it says, Echad Asar Yom Michorev. That really the Jewish people were just 11 days from Chorev, and afterwards was Arbaim Shana, and afterwards they went 40 years. Lochach, therefore, it says, V'lo nacham Elokim. That's why it says that God did not allow them to go in a straight way. They could have just gone 11 journeys and gone into the land of Israel. But God schlepped them around also. Really, the fact is that God wanted to take them quickly, but they also refused. They didn't want to go in. That was the whole story of the spies. Let's explain this. The 11 journeys that God took them in the desert, took them the 11 journeys that God took them in the desert, but it took them 40 years to make it. This is a good thing. It wasn't a punishment. It's a good thing. Why? But Pirush Echad Asar Yom, that what it says 11 days from Chorev, it means 11 journeys. It says in the Midrash, Shekai, this is talking about, which Midrash is it? Let's have a look. Shmot Rabbah, Midrash Rabbah in Shmot. So it says, this is talking about Echad Asar, this is Echad, the special one of the 10. Shu Echad, this is the one which is the head of the 10. What's the 10? 10 commandments. What's the one? The special one. What's the special of the 10 commandments? Anuchi Hashem Elokecha. The first. That's what it means. 11 days. Echad Asar Yom Michorev. Chorev is Mount Sinai. Another name for Mount Sinai is Chorev. This indicates on the level of one, which is above the 10 commandments which were given at Sinai. How does this fit into what we're saying? We'll see. This is the level of Ant Hu Chad B'lo B'chushban. You, God, are one, and you cannot be counted. In other words, God is one, but there's no number two that comes after God. There's not two gods or three gods. God is the first. No. That God is one. There's no other God. There's nothing except for God. God's essence and his being, Shalomayla, which is above the 10 Sfirot. Huh? Okay, what's going on? Whatever you want over here. Like we said before, we say in our prayers, one of the prayers we say in the end, Ein Kelokim, there's nothing like our God. The God of the Jews is totally different from all the other gods that all the other religions worship. And one main way is that God cares about and is involved in and reacts to the details of the world, physical world. God cares about every detail, tremendously important to God, this physical world, and here he wants to be revealed. It's very easy for us to think that Judaism is a religion and that God is, far away, and that God gave us all these rituals and things that we can do in this world, ceremonies, and this, we do what we're supposed to, then after you die, you go to the upper world, or you bring blessing to yourself, or whatever it is you do. Which that's true, that could be true, but that's not what Judaism is. That's not the message of Judaism. The message of Judaism is, excuse me, that God wants to be revealed in this world. God wants to be here. So don't just take the 10 commandments as being separate, somehow or other separate from the creator of the universe. God gave it because he can do whatever he wants to. So God is very high, and he gave the 10 commandments. That's a long time ago. This is not so. It's not so. I mean, of course it is so. It's true. But that's not the point. That's limiting God if you think that that's what God is. The 10 commandments, that's pure will of God right now. It's like getting inside of God's brain, uniting with God's soul. That's what the Torah is. That's the one which is in the 10, the one which is in the 10 commandments. Oh, that's what it means, that 11 days. That's the one on top of the 10. The godliness, which is in everything, the godliness in the 10 commandments, the godliness, which is in the creation, the godliness. Don't forget that the whole creation is created by God from nothing. It's a big miracle. Same thing with the Torah. That's the one on the over the 10. Yesh Lomar, we can say, that the intention in this, that God did not allow them, that the derech, and that God twisted. He detoured. Oh, he detoured the way in the desert, that it should be 11 journeys. There was 11 journeys, took them so long. Nas'am HaKadosh Baruch Hu derech HaMidbar, he took them into the desert for 40 years. Why? Bechinas echad asar, that he, in order to bring this one, the oneness of God, in the 10 commandments, in the 10 utterances, onto Chad below B'chishbon, that God is one, that you can't count. He's above all the 10 sefirot. He's above the creation. 10 sefirot is the creation. Above the 10 commandments. The reason he schlepped the Jews in the desert for 40 years is in order tumshach titkala bepinimiyut, so that the Jews should take it in an internal way. Internalize it. By going in the desert, b'meshech 40 shana, so that they should possess experience. Nothing like experience. Like it says, Ben Arba'im Labina. It says when a person is 40 years old, then he starts to he becomes mature enough, and he can start to really take things internally. In those 40 years, says God gave us a heart to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear. A person cannot reach, it says, the maturity of his teacher and his wisdom and his understanding until 40 years. So it takes a person really 40 years to internalize the things that he learns from the Torah. That then will be revealed that level of Echad Asur, the one which is in the 10 commandments, the one God which is in the 10 commandments, and the one God that's in the 10 utterances that the world was created from, and one God which is in the 10 sefirot, which is the force behind the Torah, behind the world. And not only that, that it should be revealed in Echad Asur, even in this physical world. Echad Asur also in this physical world. That's what going to the land of Israel will be complete 40 years later. So the Jews would go into the land of Israel after 40 years of experience, which was begun by going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah. So we see clearly that the Jews went out of Egypt and they received the Torah, but they didn't internalize it. As soon as there was any problem, they thought that Moses was not going to return from Mount Sinai. The third time he went up, they thought he wasn't going to. I'm sorry, the first time he went up on Mount Sinai, they thought he wasn't going to come back down. they may have miscalculated when the date when he was supposed to come down. So it says that they went berserk. The Jewish people went crazy, right? They knew everything. They heard God say, don't worship any other gods. They heard it at Mount Sinai, right? Just 40 days earlier. And they said, well, maybe God didn't mean that. Maybe he means this. Maybe it means only when we're under Mount Sinai. Maybe it means maybe, all these doubts that they had, right? When Moses was there, he quelled all their doubts. People didn't have those severe doubts. Maybe they had questions, but they wanted to know how to do things better, but they wanted to do. As soon as Moses wasn't there, all of a sudden they forgot about God. They had the Torah, but without God, you can interpret the Torah however you want. Look in there, you see, it's in 2 weeks. What did they say? They built the golden calf, and it says, one second, what does it say in the 10 commandments? I am God that took you out of Egypt. You shouldn't have any other gods. They saw the golden calf, and they said, this is the God that took us out of Egypt. This is it, right? We're not allowed to worship anything else. This is the God. They pointed to the golden calf. They said, this is the God that took us out of Egypt. How could they make such a stupid mistake? If you learn a little bit, it wasn't so stupid. It was a very, how do you say, a very excusable mistake that they made. I'm looking for a different word, but the mistake that they made had a lot of backing to it. Lahosif, and we can also add on that this is also hinted at in the beginning of our Torah portion by Yibishal Paro. It says that Paro, that he sent at the beginning of our Torah portion, that Paro, he's the one that sent the people out. Sharumas, that this hints at, remember we talked about last week, Paro of Kedusha. Paro means to be revealed. The level of Chamishit Paro. It says that when Yosef gathered all the money from the whole world, so he said 1/5 is going to go into Paro's personal treasuries. It says Chamishit Paro. As Paro is Esperiu Vesgalim Minei, there is revealed from him all of these lights of godliness above the 4 letters of God. 4 letters of God, the essence, like it says, Antucha, the oneness of God. That's Paro of holiness, means to be open. The source of even God's name, it says. God's name is just a name. That's the essence of God. That's what Paro is in its source. That's therefore Paro sent the Jewish people out. What does it mean? The source of Paro. The source of Paro. Why God makes bad in the world and how, in order that we should transform it. So that's the ability to transform bad. That's the source of Paro. This is the reason that it says that God deviated their path in the desert, that he made all these detours and he took them for 40 years. Why? In order that Paro of holiness, the source, should be drawn into their insides. And this is also hinted at the song of Dvorah. Okay, at the end of this week's Torah portion, there is the song of Dvorah. What's the song of Dvorah? Another song was written in the Torah. This, of course, is written in the book of Judges. So Dvorah, she made a big war against, what was it, Sisro. She made a big war against this. And she won the war. She won the war. She had the head of the army went with her, and they made a war, and they won the war. When they won the war, so she sang a song. So that's the song of Dvorah in our Torah portion. What does it say? But Paro'os of Israel, when bad things happened to the Jews, but Tishkoda Oretz Arbaim Shana, and the world was filled, and then we won our battles, and then the land of Israel was quiet for 40 years. Excuse me. Shegilui, that the revelation was the pros, it says, there were not good things, but the word paroa means something that's open, like we had paro. Esperil, the word, when there's revealed these highlights of godliness in the world, is drawn into the Jewish people, the ability to transform bad to good. This was revealed into the Jewish people. By means of this, also it was revealed not just into the Jewish people, but also into the land in a way that it was quiet by means of their service of God for 40 years. So we have the 40 years again. We have Paro, right? Just like it was with the Jewish people, 40 years in the desert, and they went out of Paro. The same thing was with Dvorah. We're going to do this tomorrow, but let's just do a little bit. In more detail, this is attached to the whole idea of the Jewish people going in the desert. Let me get my pointer over here. They made a mistake. The Jewish people went in the desert, like I said, they went, and all of these 42 journeys. But the 42 journeys that they made in the 40 years that they wandered in the desert. It says that 20 of those were like in one particular encampment. But nevertheless, they journeyed for 40 years in the desert until they came to the land of Israel. This began from the first journey, the journeys in our Torah portion. By Yisro, they went from Sukkot, and from Sukkot, they went to Eitan at the edge of the desert. And especially after the splitting of the sea, that God vayasa'am, that God forced the Jews to travel, and they went into the desert Shur, the desert of Shur. Shur also means to sea. And they went and they came to Midbar Sin. So 42 journeys the Jewish people made in the desert. Also, I mean, you'll see that it enumerates them, what they are. But it's later on it enumerates them in the book of Numbers. I'm sorry. In the book of this Deuteronomy. Tired. Okay. It says that they went to Midbar Sin, and they went from the desert of Sin to their travels. Okay. Now a normal person will ask a question. One second. The Jewish people, they went from Egypt and they went to Israel. What do we care about all the journeys that they made? Why did they have to make 42 journeys? So the Rebbe answers, well, very simply. I mean, they wandered around for 40 years in the desert. And they didn't have to wander 40 years. They could have made it in just a very short amount of time. Why did they wander around so long? So he says, well, they wandered around, says the Rebbe, because each one of these journeys that they made was tremendously important. And it was there in order to purify and refine the world. It's because there's sparks of holiness that fell in what's called the desert. And the source, the Shorsham, comes from this level of 11, like Paro. These sparks come from a very high place. In other words, the meaning which is concealed in the world that can only be revealed by using the world according to the Torah, these sparks of meaning are tremendously high. This is above the whole entire creation. That's what we said, the number 1, which is above 10. This is what we call the level of Makif. That from it, all of the 11 crowns of evil can nurture. Okay, let's just say this. I think we're going to come back to this tomorrow. Where does evil come from? It comes from God. How does God create evil? What do you mean? Like he creates everything else? He creates it. What's the problem? God's a problem. He can create anything he wants to. He says, yeah, but evil, I mean, is the thing that God doesn't want. He says, right. So why does he create it if he doesn't want it? Someone's forcing him to create it? He says, no, that's the whole reason God created the world, is so that there should be free choice and that we can choose to do bad, God forbid, or we can choose to do good. And the bad is a thing that's tempting. It's destroys you, but nevertheless, it's very tempting. Very tempting. And it's very luring. You know, people like to do bad. It says in Egypt, it says they were perhaps the most licentious country in the world. Even though America's, was at least, I hope it's changing now, to be America should be first, right? But anyway, it says it was the most licentious, decadent place in the world, Egypt, and people loved it. They were getting along. They were right. They were enjoying themselves. Parties, they're partying all the time. Everybody's doing whatever they want to, with whoever they want to, how they want to. That was it. So these things succeed. They're very good. Where does it come from? It comes from God. So it comes from God. So why not do it? So because God said you shouldn't do it. Where did God say you shouldn't? In the Torah. What's the Torah? A book that God gave to the Jews. So this is one of the sources of anti-Semitism. But nevertheless, God is creating all of the evil in the world. He's creating, this is a big, tremendous, deep mystery. And he's creating it and he's giving it power, that it entices us and it lures us. And it's real and it's actual as actual as we are. Until we start doing the Torah. Then you start doing the Torah, you realize that it's not really real. But that does not in any way limit its power. It's, how do you say, all right, power, I guess is the word. That's not the right word. Intimidation, I want to call it. Alluring. The Torah gives power to evil to intimidate us, to lure us, to trick us, to confuse us. That's the world. That's the word. The word for world is the same word as concealment. But it comes from a tremendously high place. That's the whole reason for the creation. And that's the whole secret of the Jewish people traveling in the desert for 42 journeys and going across the sea in order to defy the world, the bad in the world, realize the world is a big challenge and the world is a big opportunity. And after all, the world is a tremendous blessing. God wants us to be here. God wants us to transform, and even more, the evil wants us to transform the world to good. Evil itself does not really want to exist. It's just given a mandate from God and a commandment from God that has to do its job. That's the whole story of the Jewish people. And evil is as real or more real than good until you make a decision that you want to change it. Then evil becomes less and less and less and less real until finally, and that's the test. That's the big test. That's the traveling in the desert for 42 journeys. And that's what we're going to talk about, God willing, tomorrow. Now let's do the Yom Yom.